mothers of downtown New Orleans screaming at a child as she entered the William Franz Elementary School.
I want to be really frank. Public schools are built on a cracked foundation. It was not built for us. Public education has systemic flaws that have tragic outcomes for the lives of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and students who are living in poverty. The hope for public education really is that we level the playing field for all students. And Communities in Schools has been fighting for school equity for over 4 decades. This past year, the crisis in public health, racial justice, and economic uncertainty have amplified the need for our supports. Going back to normal is not an option. We are calling on everyone to shift the conversation to focus on student re-engagement, creating equitable learning environments, and in creating a school climate that benefits and supports all students. Communities in Schools unlocks potential, builds relationships, and breaks barriers that our students are facing. Whether that is a basic need as simple as food and shelter and clothing, we build a relationship of trust and allows us to really go into deeper needs. We believe that the secret weapon to uncovering students' potential is our site coordinators. They advocate with students inside schools, with their families, and even outside in their communities. We are not trying to save or rescue students. Students have an inherent ability and talent that we help them uncover. Inside schools, our site coordinators push against systems to really stand up to systemic racism within the institutions that our students are confronting.
I do believe that the work that I do as a site coordinator does help make our school more equitable.
We want you to be a friend today.
I want them to aim high. They can be strong, they can be successful.
CIS was such an extraordinary partner to me when I was leading the Chicago Public Schools. It's never been more important than it is today. And to have organizations like CIS that have a national footprint that can step up and provide real, not just academic or educational, but real moral leadership.
We believe that Communities in Schools should be a leading voice on this issue. With over 40 years of experience working inside schools, I know Communities in Schools works because it worked for me. I'm the first to graduate from my family from college, and today, as a product of the program, now lead as the president and CEO of Communities in Schools. We are calling on everyone. The time is now. The future of our country starts with our students. The evidence, the history, the research all tells us what we need to do. The question is whether we have the courage to rebuild the system of public education in a way that is just and equitable for all students.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the National Board of Communities in Schools, our national office staff, and the CIS National Network, I have the privilege of welcoming you to the 2021 Milliken Dialogues. This year, we are, of course, not able to convene this important discussion in person, but I'm pleased that we have an incredible virtual lineup of speakers and guests, including Congressman Bobby Scott, Chairman of the House Committee on Education and Labor, Haley Corman of Bellwether Education Partners, and 2 of our esteemed National Board members, Juan Sepulveda and Talitha Haley from the CIS, and joining us from CIS of Atlanta, Executive Director Frank Brown, along with one of his incredible site coordinators and a graduating student. All are joining us today to discuss the importance of re-engaging students in learning following a year marked by a pandemic, a disruption to education, and a racial reckoning in our country. Also this afternoon, we'll be releasing our annual Community Matters report, which takes a deep dive into these same issues, so that once the discussion ends here today, you'll be able to take that report back into your schools, to your communities, to continue the conversation. And we're going to invite Congressman Scott up into the virtual stage shortly to kick things off. But first, I'd like to take a moment or two to do a little bit of table setting. For so many of the young people we serve, it's been a year of just devastating loss Loved ones lost days in schools with teachers and friends or lost economic stability. This has led to delayed dreams of graduation or going to college. In fact, many students have disengaged from school in order to support their families. It's been just quite a year. And when I stepped into the role of national president and CEO at the beginning of it all, I never could have predicted that it would have affected the very core of what we do at Communities in Schools, being inside schools to help students. At first, there was so much chaos and crisis, and there was so much that urgently needed to be done. We had to make sure students had our support. We had to make sure families didn't go hungry. We had to make sure our school communities stayed safe and that our staff did as well. That need for safety first meant that so many of our staff could not set foot in schools for months or even the entire year, and yet they continued their important work in new ways. Our national network connected with families on doorsteps and in stairwells, in the parking lots of food banks and shelters. They came armed with grocery bags, rent subsidy checks, household goods, connected devices, and even headphones to ensure focused learning. They were willing to go beyond the school walls to reach our students and families. That's been our motto and our call to action this past year, because we understood the students we serve were already on unequal footing before the shutdown of schools. Black and brown students and students from under-resourced communities were already disadvantaged within our education system. The pandemic just exacerbated that. They also were under the added social and emotional pressure as they witnessed the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others as they tried to make sense of a national demonstration, a protest for racial justice. And we saw early on that students were feeling disconnected and disengaged from learning, putting them at greater risk for dropping out of school entirely. And at one point, as our friends at Bellwether found, as many as 3 million students were unaccounted for, missing from online learning or in-person instruction. So what did that mean for Communities in Schools? It meant that we had to meet the moment and re-engage those 3 million students. We knew how to do it. We hit the streets and knocked on doors. We called, we texted, we emailed. We were on their social medias, checking their Instagram. But we realized getting them back in front of a computer monitor or into a physical classroom was not enough. There is a science and a methodology to re-engagement. That's why we partnered with some of the best in the business, the American Institute for Research, to develop a model of re-engagement, not only for our students, but for their families. And today, 1 year later, we've made incredible progress. More schools are open, more young people are in class, and more students are reporting improvements, not only in academics, but in their social, emotional, and mental well-being. But we are not out of the woods. This spring, our in-school staffers are trying to help students see beyond the challenges of the past year so that they can finish the school year strong and make it to the next grade or to graduation. We have a long journey ahead and we cannot go it alone. It's going to require a community of support to re-engage every student and to reimagine school as a place that ensures all students have the same opportunities for success, no matter their race, income, or zip code. And that community support will include nonprofit partners, businesses, faith-based organizations, and elected leaders. And so now it's my honor to welcome Congressman Bobby Scott to the Milliken Dialogues and Policy Summit. And let me start by telling you a little bit about the Congressman and his public service. Congressman Scott serves as the chairman of House Education on Education and Labor. In this capacity, he's advancing an agenda that improves equity in education, frees students from the burdens of crippling debt, protects and expands access to affordable health care, ensures workers have a safe workplace where they can earn a living wage free from discrimination, and guarantees seniors have a secure and dignified retirement. Congressman Scott has represented Virginia's 3rd congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives since 1993, prior to his service in Congress. He served in the Virginia House of Delegates from 1978 to 1983, and in the Senate of Virginia from 1983 to 1993. Chairman, I want to thank you for your leadership and advocacy on educational equity, which has helped to ensure that the students most in need are supported during one of the most critical times in this country's history. Chairman Scott, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here today.
Well, thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to give a shout out to my friends and Communities in Schools in my district in Hampton Roads and in Richmond that I used to represent. They've done a tremendous job making sure all students get a decent education.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman, for acknowledging the great work happening in Virginia. And now we're getting to see a little bit of what happens in Virginia, hopefully get to affect education systems all across the country with our work at Communities in Schools. So I want to start really, Chairman, as the chair of the House of Committee on Education and Labor, you're responsible for several large pieces of legislation that impact families, especially families that live in low-income and middle-class communities. And you've also worked on key pieces of stimulus funds that supported education in the CARES Act, Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriation, and more recently, the American Rescue Plan. The latest funding really pushes states and school districts to focus on summer learning, social emotional support, mental health, and integrated student supports. You have an audience here of education advocates, thought leaders, decision makers, and nonprofit leaders. Why was it important for the federal government to take such an unprecedented investment in education, focusing on these areas?
Well, we had a problem in education equity even before the pandemic. Nobody knows that better than communities and schools. The schools regrettably have regressed in integration to the point where they're as segregated now as they were in the 1960s. The achievement gaps are bad, and along comes the pandemic and just makes things worse. A lot of the students did not have computers, so they just didn't benefit at all from the distance learning. Some school districts didn't have the connectivity or the technology to make distance learning work. And so in some areas, the bad achievement gaps just got worse. And so all through the pandemic, we knew that there were things that had to be done. One of the things, I mean, the digital divide is a solvable problem. You just have to buy people computers. Make sure that all the students have a computer, one-to-one. Each student has a device, not one for the household, but one for each student, so that if classes are going on at the same time, everybody can participate. And also, some don't have internet connections. You can have a computer, but if you're not connected to anything, you haven't done anything. So you have to make sure that all the students are connected. For low-income students, that's a huge barrier, but it's one that we can solve. And the money in the CARES Act, one of the first large COVID relief bills, and certainly in the American Rescue Plan, a huge COVID relief plan, gave the localities the money to deal with this. But it's essential that we deal with it, because the achievement gap would just get worse and worse. There are a lot of things you can do with money that you can't do without money. You can't reduce the class size. You can't have if you're going to have in-person instruction, you've got to have the PPE. You've got to have counselors in schools. You have to have nurses in schools. There's just a lot. You have to have more buses because you have fewer students on a bus. There are a lot of expenses. One very important expense is ventilation. As you know, CDC says you can be in a restaurant outside but not inside, and that's because if you're inside in a stuffy room, one sick person can infect everybody. If you have proper ventilation, then maybe people won't get infected. The same thing goes on in a classroom. If you have improper ventilation, one sick student can infect the whole class. And the sinister thing about this illness is that you don't know you have it when you begin being contagious. And so you have to make sure that you have the proper ventilation at a time when a study showed last year that 40% of the school districts need to repair, replace the ventilation systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning in more than half their schools. Well, obviously, that's not free. And I think the money's there so that all of the school districts can open appropriately and start dealing with the learning loss.
Congressman, thank you so much for really displaying the amount of intention that you were taking to learning from folks. It's obvious that you've spoken to a lot of educators. I was watching a call that you did a few months ago with the superintendents from your district, and I think what they're telling you is voicing a number of the things that you have talked about in that address, which is you're right. Sometimes you don't do more you don't do more with less, you do less with less. And I think the rescue plan dollars and some of the funding that has come through has been just incredibly critical. So I was going to just kind of along those lines, we know that a lot of students, for a variety of reasons, are falling behind in learning, and they miss a year of school or more. And many are at risk of falling behind academically or not graduating from high school. In what ways are you hoping to see the ARP funds spent on catching students up on this missed learning opportunity?
Well, one of the things we did with the rescue plan was designated at least 20% has to be used for learning loss. Actually, the whole thing, everything ought to be used for learning loss, but by designating 20%, we guarantee that a plan will be developed specifically for learning loss so that we'll know exactly what's being done. We know there's a significant learning loss, particularly amongst low-income students. This organization doesn't have to be lectured on what summer slide means, that low-income students regress during the summer. Well, they've been summer sliding for over a year. If they can lose a month or two during the summer, well, they did that last summer, then they did that again last fall, and then they did that again last winter, and they're still sliding. Well, that's a lot of learning loss to make up. And we have made sure that the money is there to address learning loss. Now, the American Rescue Plan, all the plans have distributed the money essentially according to the Title I formula, which means that the money goes disproportionately to the low-income areas where it is most needed, where they need counselors and they need other things that a lot of these schools don't have. And if we just look at the first thing we need to do is, first of all, assess who's behind and by how much. Some of the schools may have done okay with distance learning, and others, not well at all. But we need to make sure we have identified who's behind and how much, and those who are way behind may need to be in smaller class sizes. They may need more counselors, assistant teachers, longer class days, education during the summer, maybe Saturday classes, afternoon enrichment programs. There's a lot that they need, and we need to make sure that they get it. And one of the things we did in the rescue plan is make sure that there's enough money to get the job done. Some of the school districts will have a significant portion of their budget matched. 50, maybe some may even have 100% of their budget coming in through the rescue plan. In low-income areas, thousands of dollars per student will not be an unusual allotment because it's being distributed according to the Title I formula, which aims money at low-income students and has plus-ups for concentrations of poverty. If you are in in areas of very concentrated poverty, you'll get a lot of money out of the rescue plan, and we expect you to do a lot with it. Assess who's behind and how much, and make sure they catch up. And that's why these catch-up plans are so important, and why it's important to have a plan that deals with all of the problems you've had. Now, these school districts could not have budgeted this money. Nobody knew there'd be a rescue plan. And so this money is there to be used, and communities and schools, I'm sure, will be given guidance to school districts on how they can effectively use the money to eliminate achievement gaps, to make sure the students who essentially lost a year of learning, low income, minorities, English as a second language, especially students with disabilities. We had a separate $3 million specifically for them, but that's not going to be enough to deal with all of the problems that students with disabilities will be having. But we need to use these funds and make sure that we focus and catch up. That's really been the communities in schools mission all along. And finally, you've got the resources to be able to fulfill your mission.
Well, Chairman, it is just a breath of fresh air knowing that not only are you leading in Congress on this issue, but leading in this committee in thinking about what equity truly means, especially with something as specific as the kind of funding that we put out to support our schools and our educators and our teachers. I think to overuse a term that's been used a lot is what I think you've just described is how do we truly reimagine schools to support all students, and what we do to provide the kind of resources to those schools who may need a little more to ensure that we've got the counselors or the social workers or the communities and school site coordinators focus on all those things that students need. That's the real vision of getting to see us learn from this. And it sort of brings me to a question that is a little bit about some of the work and some of the vision that you've had. And what we know has happened is that many students have disengaged from school. We've seen that in a number of different ways or a number of different research. Some students have had to work, for example, now that their families, and see no reason to go back to school. But can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing to help students access career pathways while completing their education?
Well, we passed a couple of years ago the career and technical education to make sure that the technical education, what used to be called vocational education, is there. Those opportunities are there, and make sure that there's good coordination between the high school and community colleges, because a lot of we know that a substantial portion of the jobs of the future will require education past the high school level, not necessarily a four-year college degree, but some education and training past the high school level. One of the things we passed already, it's over in the Senate, is the National Apprenticeship Act, to provide 1 million new opportunities, additional opportunities for apprenticeships. And we have drafted the legislation to encourage an expansion of the kinds of jobs that you can be in an apprenticeship for, not just the normal building trades, but also jobs in healthcare and technology and insurance and banking and things like that, that people ought to have that advantage. We also significantly fund the normal workforce training infrastructure that we have. The workforce, and we owe a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Make sure those are fully funded so that people who access that that structure will have opportunities. We're encouraging community colleges. I know in Virginia we have the short-term programs, and one of the things we're going to try to do is create what are called short-term Pell Grants. Right now, we have programs in Virginia where you, in 2, 3, 6 months, you can get a job that'll increase your earning capacity 25, 50, even 100%. But many of these cost 2, 3, maybe as much as $5,000. Well, you've seen the reports that said that the average family can't come up with $400 if they had to, so that's out of range. You'd like to use a Pell Grant, but you can only use a Pell Grant if a college credit leads to a college degree. If all it leads to is a good job, can't use a Pell Grant. Well, that's ridiculous. If it leads to a good job, you ought to be able to use a Pell Grant. We have to be cautious as we open this door that we don't allow little storefronts to pop up and take everybody's money and deal out worthless credentials. If we limit it to referrals from the WIOA program, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act boards, referrals, or community colleges, I think we can guarantee quality and not open it up to the abuse that we've seen in some of the college programs. But we need to make sure those investments are possible with Pell Grants. And a lot of things that we can do. But we've already put in a lot of money into the process with the education. The president's infrastructure plan is a Jobs and Families Act. Jobs which will fund the creation of the jobs, the roads, the bridges, school construction, at least $100 billion in school construction to deal with problems of improper ventilation and the fact that schools are over 45 years old. School construction along with the roads, bridges, and housing, which would be very new for an infrastructure package. But also the next part would be the family's part, would be funding the initiatives that make it possible for you to go to work. How are you going to go to work if you don't have daycare? Job training, all of the kinds of things that make it possible for people to go to work are in the family's part. So the combination, I think, is an excellent initiative. It will move America forward. It's fiscally responsible. We repeal some, not all of the Trump tax cuts to pay for it. It's paid for within 15 years. And so I think the America will do well by if we can pass this plan, get the jobs created, get the school construction funded, but most of all, give young people the opportunity to go to work.
Well, Chairman, I think you've helped me just kind of get a good sense of not only where we've come from, because we've talked a lot about what we will need to get through the moment and this moment of the pandemic and the investments you're making, but also thinking about the future, especially around workforce and getting people back to work, getting Americans back to work, and also thinking about the beginnings of the pipeline of our students and ensuring they are able to take advantage of that. So, Chairman, thank you just so much for your leadership and for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us at Communities in Schools. And one final question. The next session that we're going to have after this is going to include a graduating senior from Atlanta. I wonder if you have any words of advice that you'd like to share with that student.
Well, if he's graduating, our opportunity to invest in him are somewhat limited to this point for K through 12, but we're trying to improve the opportunities he'll have after that. One of the challenges we have is the fact that in order to get a college degree, you have to be willing to incur crushing debt. We're trying to allow people to go to college, get a 4-year degree without meaningful debt. If you're willing to work 15 hours a week, you should be able to work your way through college with no debt. If you're not willing to work, if you want to take a little more of a course load and not able to work, then maybe a modest debt. But people should not have to mortgage their future in order to get a 4-year degree. When I was in college, if you could go to college, if you could get in, you could afford to go, and you did not have to incur a crushing debt in order to go. Pell Grant covered about 80% of the cost of going to college. That's because the states were putting up about 2/3 of the cost of the state college. Now the states are putting up 1/3 or less, and the Pell Grant covers about 30%. Well, the rest is on the student, and that's just not fair. Particularly when we have enough money for tax cuts and a couple of rounds, 80% of the benefits going to the top 1% in corporations. That money should have gone to reducing the cost of colleges. That's one of the things that's on the agenda to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, is to make sure that this young man's college education can be affordable so that he could go to college, get out, and go on with his life with the significantly more opportunities, but not held back by virtue of a crushing student loan debt. So we're helping. We're going to try to make loans less likely to be needed and easier to pay off if you have to incur some. So tell them we're trying to help. And hopefully the future is bright.
Well, Congressman, once again, thank you so much. What a leader to have in your position to chair the Education Committee, understanding what it will really look like for us to grapple with this question of fairness that you talked about and how we will be graded on this moment, but also into the future as we are all striving for a kind of justice, especially for those who have been historically overlooked or been discriminated against. What a time to be a leader, and we're just grateful that you've joined us here today. So thank you so much. And now at this moment, I'd like to turn it over to Talitha Haley, who is our moderator for the next panel.
Thank you so much, Ray and Chairman Scott, for your words of wisdom. I'm Talitha Halley, Communities and Schools National Board Member and alumna. I'm joined here with Evelyn Anastasio Garcia, who's a current student of CIS Atlanta and a graduating senior. I remember long ago, exactly 10 years this year, when I was graduating from high school, and I was so excited about starting at Howard and being an adult, which, if I do say so myself, is completely overrated. Evelyn is joined by Jeanette Lopez, her site coordinator. Thank you both for taking time out of your day to join us. Evelyn, I'd like to get this conversation started with you. Tell us what the past year or 2 years have been like for you as you've experienced virtual learning, a contentious election, and the country's most recent racial reckoning. Evelyn?
Hey, my name is Evelyn. Well, for me, the past 2 years, they have been difficult because at first I thought that virtual learning was gonna be easy, but then when we started doing our work, that's when everything started for me. I started giving up on school. I wasn't planning to graduate. I was just planning to just give up. Well, that's when I met Jonathan. I met him towards the end of March when all the coronavirus thing started.
Give me a second, baby. So Jonathan was the person that was working at CIS. Then, like, Jonathan is a very good friend of mine. He was working the first semester. That's how Evelyn met him because he was working with them. The next semester, I took over, but I had been volunteering with CIS just to give a little context. Sorry about that, baby. Keep going.
Yeah, like I said, that's when I met Jonathan towards the end of March when everything was getting shut down, the schools got shut down. That's when we started virtual learning. That's when they offered their help to me. They offered their house, their time. They would give up their free time. My site coordinator, Jeanette, and Jonathan, they provided their house for me. They provided me food, and they gave up their free time with being with friends and family to be with me and help me graduate on time. And
Was it just you?
and it was not just me, it was other peers, so it was like a full house for
So,
them.
so can you give us like a little bit of context on how the setup was? Can you describe that?
Like how y'all prepared us.
No, like how we set up the house, like physically, like todas las mesas y todo.
We came to their house. They have a big porch at the back. They set it up tables, computers. They provided us with their Wi-Fi from home. They provided us with snacks, drinks, and with materials like notebooks, pencils, and they would have other friends volunteer and come and help us get our work done. So like math, science, reading, or even so logging into our computers because some of us couldn't log in, or we would have trouble with the Wi-Fi at home, and they would provide us with the things we didn't have at home.
What about talk a little bit about when we did the parent meetings. Remember that?
Oh yes. At first, when they started the program, they had parents come in because some of our parents were confused, including my mom. She was one of the first person that she was confused. She didn't know what was going on. She didn't know like what were we doing at her house. So that's when Jeanette came in. She grabbed all the parents, sat them in like one room, and she explained each one of them what this program was and what it was gonna do with us. Like they explained that they were gonna help us like get to where we need to be. And that's when my mom, she calmed down a little bit and she trusted Jeanette with having me at her house.
So
Thank you.
I want to, yeah, like
Sorry, I
yeah.
interrupted. No worries. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us, Evelyn. As adults, we hardly get the opportunity to hear directly from students who are actually in school. Your voice is super important and critical to this conversation. Jeanette, we've heard from Evelyn about what life has been like for her. Can you please share with us your CIS story and how you started working with students like Evelyn? I know you talked a little bit about it already, but give us a full
Yeah.
picture.
So first of all, like, I feel like I always have something to say about everything, and today you guys have me speechless, really. Um, I always say like show don't tell, right? So I like to work quietly, but I think Evelyn is a person that there is a reason of why I'm helping her. And I'm going to read it because I told everybody that we were going to represent, and I don't say that lightly too. We represent. So we're here, and and that's why I wrote this. And I'm just gonna read it because otherwise I'm gonna go on a tangent and talk a lot. And this is my piece for it. So I'm just gonna read what I wrote. I said, I believe in all my students. Um, I believe in them and in their potential intentionally. And I do that with the hope that one day they will believe in themselves and they will believe in their potential. Um, I believe in site coordinators because I invited my mentor and the Jeanette, um, like the mentor that was like to me, my mentor, like she was invited into the space. I hope she's here. Her name is Alba Gutierrez. Um, and so I believe in site coordinators because Alba Gutierrez believed in me once upon a time when I didn't even believe in myself, even though she saw that I didn't know how to give up because that was never an option. Um, she was my site coordinator and she just knew how to show up always, always with like just saying like Janet, tú puedes, Janet, échale ganas, hey Janet, ¿qué onda? That was what I needed, and yeah, I mean, she checked me when she needed to. She provided so much love for me and everybody, and she is so underappreciated, like in all the aspects. Like they should really like pay her in diamonds or something. I don't know. But so I don't have all the answers for on how to do things or how to show up because I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I just know how I work, and sometimes sometimes it's beyond me. Like I do everything that I can because I believe in these children, but sometimes like I realize that I can't do anything. But I will always try and continue because there's just things that go above me. Sometimes it's not their time, I believe. Um, but I think what helps with that is that the truth, I think, or the solution lies in the small details. I'm a very detail oriented person. Like I told Evelyn, listen, I'll show you the thing. Like I even brought her some toilet paper because I feel like she was gonna cry. I was like, here, girl, I got you. Um, anyway, it's just the funny part. But I always tell my students, what do I always tell you? The 10%.
That
Give me
10%, she's gonna give you 3,000.
What does that mean?
Sí,
Pues dilo en español si quieres.
si ella te da 10%, si tú le das 10%, ella te da
3,000.
3,000.
Sí. And like you told me what that meant because you understood, but right now you're nervous and I get it. This is a lot. But what that means is that if they give me 10% effort, I will give them 3,000 effort because I see it. If they just give me a little bit, a grain, I'll do my best because why they trusted me. And that is big to me, you know. And this work can be so taxing for so many reasons. And but to me, it's not because I build capacity in doing things I genuinely love because I'm a genuine person. And that's how I build capacity because people come to me from all different schools and like I have so many people that come to me and I'm just like, whoa, like, thank you for trusting me. But like, oh my gosh, like this is the focus right now. And like, and that's why I'm terrible with my email because I get so many and just say, okay, replies fast, like schedules the sends and everything. But I try to work around it and organize myself in a strategic way to make sure that I take care of the people that I love and believe in. And, you know, and Evelyn is one of them. I told her that.
That's the story of site coordinator and student relationship that we always see. And I definitely can empathize with your site coordinator relationship with, you know, your own mentor, because I've had that relationship as well, like so many other students. And so before we run out of time, I just want to thank you, Jeanette. And Evelyn, I like to end the conversation with you. You're about to graduate from high school, and I know that all students dread this question, but what are you looking forward to after graduation?
Oh, okay. What do you look forward after graduation?
Well, after graduation, I look forward to going into college to start my career in nursing, because that, as when I met Jeanette, she asked me what did I want to be in the future. And that was my first response. But I had a reason why I wanted to start that career, because in my family, I had 2 family members that I lost. One, it was due to cancer, and the other one, it was due to, I don't know if y'all know, HIV. So that was one of my majors. I told Janae, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do nursing. I want to help people get better. I don't want nobody to go through what I went through, like in the past few years. And the sad thing is that I both lost them in like on March. And on March is supposed to be a special day because that's my birthday in March 14th. And well, like the last few birthdays I had to, like, you know, I had a depressed birthday. And I had well,
Yes, okay. No te preocupes. Chilla. Ya te dije. Pues está bien.
If I may interject, I did have another question that might help round us out. What advice do you have for adults as we think about ways to improve education for all students? And what do you think we should keep in mind?
Párate. Respira. Está bien. Okay.
What advice I have for adults is that never leave us alone, because even us as teenagers, we always need of an advice from an adult, or we just need somebody to push us forward. Because like I said, when I was in school, I was like, oh, I want to give up on school, because I didn't have no motivation from none of my teachers, nor my principal, or like even though my counselors, they didn't help me in anything. They were just like, oh, if you graduate, you graduate. That's on you. And then that's when I met Jonathan. He gave me that push that I needed to graduate, and he helped me. He gave me all the resources with Jeanette. And my advice for adults, it's like to never leave us alone, because we always need a little, but we always need something from you all.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and spending time with us today and letting us into your world. I know how important these relationships are and how tough it is. And I don't know how tough it is to go to school and virtual learning, but I thought that working from home was going to be super fun. And it wasn't, because there's an expiration date on everything. But thank you so much for being with us. This was a super important and enriching conversation. And Tiffany Miller, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Talitha. I think I need a minute. That was incredibly moving to hear from Evelyn, and just to see the bond and the relationship between the site coordinator and the student. We've always said at Communities in Schools that's our secret sauce. And I think that was definitely on display right now. It's always such a pleasure to hear from students. As adults, like Evelyn said, we need to be sure to listen to them, to hear them, to never give up on them, and to ensure that their voice is integrated into our work. Thank you for that. For those of you that don't know me, I am Tiffany Miller, Vice President of Policy at Communities and Schools at the National Office. Today, we are also releasing our annual Community Matters report. It's aligned with this event. The report is also focused on the pandemic and re-engaging students in learning. In the report, you'll learn how Communities and Schools is working across the country to ensure equitable conditions for learning and sustained engagement of students. To download the 2021 Community Matters report, you can scroll down on the events site and click the Community Matters icon. Up next is our last panel for this afternoon. It's focused on policy. Please welcome to the virtual stage, Juan Sepulveda, Communities and Schools National Board Member, Ron Colgar, Distinguished Visiting Professor of Practice and Political Science, and moderator of the next panel.
Thanks again, Tiffany. And I also wanted another big shout out to my fellow board member, Talitha, to Jeanette and Evelyn for that previous conversation. That was fantastic. And we all just want to say congratulations again to Evelyn. You heard about how tough it was for her and how she wanted to give up. So I want to say congratulations again on hanging in there and graduating. And we look forward to you becoming a part of the healthcare system as a nurse. So thank you all. So I'm excited today to have a couple of great guests with us for the next part of our conversation. I am joined by Frank Brown, who is our CEO of the Communities and Schools of Atlanta, and Haley Corman, who is a Senior Associate Partner at Bellwether Education Partners. I just wanted to mention up front, if we have enough time, we're hoping we'll have some time for some questions and answers. You'll see to the right of your screen, there's an audience participation button. If you're in full screen, you'll have to get out of it to find it, but it's on your right-hand side. If you got some questions, please put those in as we're having our conversation, and hopefully we'll have some time to ask our guests to answer some of your questions today. But I'd love to start with Haley. Haley, Ray mentioned earlier today that you had put together, you helped publish an alarming report that estimated that, and when we think about in the past year during the pandemic, that there were approximately 3 million marginalized students around the country who were missing from school. So I'd love to start there and have you tell us more about what you found in that report.
Yeah, I am happy to talk a bit about that analysis. The first thing I want to make sure that everyone understands, it's only an estimate. And the reason it's only an estimate is because we don't have good data. We don't have national data. We rarely have good local data. So back in October, we decided to pull together this estimate to help people understand the scale. What is the possibility? Because when we think by classroom or even by school, right, 1 or 2 kids missing from a classroom, a dozen kids missing from a school, it can feel like a small number. It can feel like the sort of thing, our school social worker can take care of that. We've got people knocking on doors. We know teachers are calling. What happens when you add up all those 12s and 10s and 18s across the country? So what we did was we created a deduplicated super subgroup. And what that means was we looked at all of the national data that were available, and we found those data sets on the groups of students who have historically been faced with obstacles in getting to school and doing well in school, for whom there is good national data. So we necessarily had to leave out some groups of students, for example, students who are pregnant and parenting, because we don't have good national data on that population. And then we tried to do some deduplication because we know that many students who, for example, are English learners are also eligible to participate in the migrant education program. But it's not the same group of students. We know there is a lot of overlap, but they're not identical. So we did the best we could to deduplicate. So we had this population of students who we describe as sort of historically, educationally marginalized. And our analysis asked the question of what would happen if just 1% of them, your students who are experiencing homelessness, students in foster care, English learners, students with disabilities, what if 1% of them weren't coming to school? 5%, 10%, 25%. And we actually think 25% holds up with what we're seeing from data coming out of schools and districts. Well, if 25% of those kids aren't showing up in classrooms, that's more than 3 million kids. That is larger than the school-age population of the state of Florida, right? It's no longer a handful of kids here, a handful of kids there. This is a crisis. You really wanted folks to understand the scale of the problem, but what we're not able to do is answer the next key questions, which are who is missing and why.
Great. So quick follow-up, Haley. I know that Chairman Scott kind of said earlier to us, I think something that we all know is the starting point. Students who were kind of missing from school, they didn't have computers and they didn't have access to Wi-Fi. But I know your study was looking to say even beyond that, there were other things that were going on as to why students weren't there. Tell us a little bit about beyond the computers and the Wi-Fi, what else was going on?
Right. So we think it's incredibly important for state leaders, district leaders, and school leaders to be out asking in their communities, asking their families, asking their young people this question of who is missing and why. For many students, we know there is a digital divide problem to solve. It is both device access and broadband access. It is the relationship between the two of those. It is competition for broadband time, even where you have multiple devices. If you don't have high-speed internet, it's not an easy problem to solve. We also know some students are having a hard time accessing school because they're not receiving the language supports that they need for our English learners. We know that students with disabilities aren't always receiving the support that they are entitled to that will allow them to access remote learning. We know that some of our younger students, their families have made decisions to potentially not enroll them in kindergarten this year, just hold them back for another year. And then we know at the far other end of the age spectrum, many of our 17, 18, 19-year-olds, sort of year 13 high school students may have stopped out just short of graduation. Some of them have transitioned to the workforce. They may be primary wage earners for their families. I'm sure many of the folks in our audience have either read stories or had experiences of high school students dialing into a Zoom call from their job. And they're trying to juggle both things simultaneously. But we know that there are populations of students for whom their families and their communities are disproportionately experiencing the direct effects of the pandemic, the economic hardship, potentially losses in their families. They may have, a parent may have died, right? So they may be stepping into that wage earner role. They may be stepping into a caregiving role. They may be providing education support for a younger sibling. There's a constellation of reasons, and we need to understand what they are.
Great. Thanks, Haley. So that helps us. Frank, I want to turn to you. So as Haley's kind of helping us understand, and you on the ground, you and your team are facing this complicated set of factors. So would love to kind of turn to you now, Frank, and kind of hear about how you and your team in Atlanta took it on. What have you guys been doing? How have you guys gone about trying to re-engage students, and how you guys are doing the work?
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Ray and the national office for inviting us. This is our first time participating in an event like this. And as you know, Juan, CIS of Atlanta started this whole network 50 years ago next year. So we are the originators of this movement. So me and my staff are working every day to innovate what we do. And I think you heard Congressman Scott say it, high school is not enough. So in Atlanta, we have already been engaged in supporting our kids past high school. We have about 2,500 kids in 4 school districts and 57 schools across those 4 school districts. And we also support 107 of our alumni who are in colleges and universities across this country. And we believe that every kid we serve has to be a full participant in the American dream. And when we say that, we mean a homeowner, a taxpayer, a positive addition to their community, and a community leader. So that's why, with the help of BET, what we did was give away over $600,000 in emergency assistance to over 2,500 of our families. And the majority, I hear this conversation going on about disconnection. It's bigger than that in Atlanta. Atlanta is the income inequality capital of the country. For the last 2 years, the poorest of the poor people of color are in the city that we serve. So we know that you have to get something past high school. 2/3 of the jobs in this economy, as Congressman Scott said, require post-high school certifications. So we cannot beat our chest as a network and be proud that we're getting poor Black and brown kids out of usually low-performing high schools, and we don't track what happens to them afterwards. So to see that Ray has embraced what we're doing here in Atlanta, and that's now having a caseload that goes from 3rd grade to seniors in college. And we don't celebrate just high school graduations on Mother's Day. We have college graduations and technical school graduations, because that's the caseload that's closer to the American dream than any that we serve. And that turns into real economic mobility. Everybody knows a college degree, a person with a college degree earns over their lifetime over $1 million more than a high school diploma, a person who has a high school diploma. So why would we tell poor Black and brown kids, which is the majority of the network we serve, that high school is enough? So the innovation in Atlanta and that is being embraced across the country is not enough. And that we now must provide supports past high school. That's why we gave over $60,000 in tuition assistance. We're talking about the debt. We're paying college tuition so they don't have to take out loans. And I think the whole network has to embrace that trajectory of just 3rd grade until they graduate college or technical school.
Great. Thanks, Rankin. So that's incredible to hear about the expansion model, right? Particularly as we're hearing a lot of conversation at the federal level about the potential for 2 years of community college, and now thinking of pre-K through 14 as the new system. Wanted to ask you just a short one here to follow up. In addition to kind of the emergency assistance you gave to families, you talked about some of the tuition piece on the other end as well too. Give us some examples of some of the other things during the pandemic that you guys were doing in Atlanta with your students.
Well, we were already engaged. We were dealing with the most vulnerable kids anyway. So nothing changed for us. We just got deeper. So with our emergency assistance, it got deeper. With our home visits and health check-ins, it got deeper. We also had great corporate support. Rourke Capital came in, a private equity group that's based here in Atlanta and owns everything from Dunkin' Donuts to Arby's, and gave us $400,000 to work in 3 APS schools. We've had Deloitte come in and pay us now to work in another APS school. So CIS of Atlanta was founded by the Wallace Foundation back in 2016 as the oldest practitioner of collective impact in the country. That's bringing government, nonprofits, and corporations together. So we believe that we have a blueprint for the rest of the network to follow. And that's really having a good sense of a corporate engagement, that's having your government. And we have braided funding. We just don't rely on federal funding. We have county funding. We have local funding. We have city funding in some instances that comes in. So I think you have to be diverse in your fundraising apparatus. But more importantly, I'm going to step back. One thing we did do that I want to highlight is that we gave the biggest bonus out to our site coordinators ever in the company's history, $250,000. And when we talk, the most important asset is not me, it's not Ray, it's Jeanette and the thousands of site coordinators who go into schools every day and work 12 months a year, 7 days a week. We gave out on average bonuses of $4,000 to $6,000 to our site coordinators using our PPP loan. That got them. We couldn't do anything without them. So to know, and we gave over $50,000 in emergency assistance to our site coordinators to help pay for their shortcomings. Because if they weren't engaged, I'm just talking, nothing would have happened. So we took care of home first. And I thank my board for giving me the authority to do that. You got to take care of home. You can't go out there and help other people if the people you're sending to schools, their lights is off or they can't put food. How are they motivated to help the poor and their poor? Our site coordinators are only 2 steps away from the people we serve. So getting that salary up to $50,000, $60,000 is something the network must do, because our work is predicated and the success is predicated on who we put in these schools across the country. And if they're underpaid, if they're under-resourced, if they don't have work plans and they're not being properly managed, the collective impact will be zero, because you won't have effective outcomes that change kids' lives and make them full participants in the American dream.
Great. So let me follow up, Frank. So I know got to take care of the family, right? We got to take care of the CIS family as part of the strategy. But as you mentioned earlier, I think folks who are watching right now are going to be interested. How did you do it? Tell us a little bit about how you were doing the funding pieces, these corporate relationships. What was kind of local, state, federal, nonprofit, business? What was the combination, and what would be your best advice to folks on how to get it done?
Well, we've been doing it every day. I don't think it's something you got to wait on a crisis for. You should be diversifying your funding every day as a nonprofit. That's just best practice. We also did not, we have reserves, over $3 million in reserves that we manage this crisis. So I think you got to run a good business first. Before you do good work, you got to have a financially stable business that can pay people. So for us, what we're trying to give people a blueprint of is you got to have a strategic plan. We had a 5-year plan that we just adjusted on the edges that was already geared as far as deepening our impact. We had a goal of having over 95% of the kids on our caseload do one of two things: graduate high school on time or earn promotion to the next grade. So we are working now on a strategic plan that we will roll out next year for the next 5 years. So you got to have a strategic, you got to have the right board. You got to have the right leadership. I think CIS as a network needs more diversity in the leadership ranks. I think I have a different perspective running this organization because I'm one of those kids. I have a brother doing 15 years for voluntary manslaughter. I come from a low-income community. I know, but for my education, I wouldn't be on this august panel with you today. So having diversity in leadership, having great boards that are really into the mission and that fundraise, not just cheerlead, but fundraise, and having a brand like CIS. I think the national office has done a great job with marketing. We are one of 5 markets to get extra support as far as making sure the logo so it's a whole hodgepodge of things you have to do over time well. So it's no magic wand. If you got to get a good development director. You got to have plans and you got to be able to execute. I think that's what we are doing here in Atlanta. We're not just talking. Jeanette will tell you, we're executing and we're following these kids and tracking them so we'll know whether Johnny or Evelyn graduates from college or technical school and can report that back to our funders.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Frank. Haley, let me go back to you. Once again, when we think about the challenge for a lot of the schools, which is around the funding, but we heard Chairman Scott talk about this a little bit earlier about the funds that are available through the American Rescue Plan. So we'd love to kind of get your thoughts from what you saw in your report, this complicated set of factors that are going on. What are some of the ways that you think the schools and the districts can take advantage of that funding to find and re-engage the students who've been lost during the pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a couple of things that I think about, and I put them into 3 big categories. I think about guidance, I think about resources, and I think about expectations, right? We've got folks in every school building out there caring about kids, looking for kids, whether it is from someone from CIS, whether it is a classroom teacher, it's a bus driver, it's the office manager. But folks are doing this often without good guidance. Some of them are very good at it. Some of them are networked in with organizations like CIS, and they're getting good guidance about how to do that well. For others, this is the first time they have tried to do something like this. So finding ways to deliver that high quality guidance, what works, right? What really helps to get connected with kids and understand what they need. Then I think about resources, right? How do you actually pay for that stuff? You need more people out on the ground, knocking on doors. People are doing this in their free time. They're doing it on weekends. How do we resource that? How do we make that sustainable? Sometimes that's just additional headcount. Sometimes that's bonusing. Sometimes it's around rallying and training volunteers. But it is not the kind of thing you can just sort of like collect people and send them out and assume they'll do well, right? They need to be trained. So we need resources to do that. We need expectations. We need people to understand what they ought to do when they find themselves encountering a family with a child who's not enrolled in school. And that goes far beyond the school building, right? The office manager knows what to do when the family comes in and someone's not been enrolled. But does the person working the intake desk at the health clinic know what to do, who to call, who to talk to? Right? So delivering those kinds of expectations and building them into our funding strategies is a way to make sure that we have coherent plans to support young people. The other thing that I think is really important for folks to keep in mind is as they're designing a strategy, and you do need to design a strategy, thinking about, informed by that who is missing and why. So I've learned that it is a lot of my 5-year-olds never signed up for kindergarten, right? I need a strategy to connect with them versus a lot of my 18-year-olds never finished high school, right? It's a very different strategy to get them what they need. And then thinking about designing for our highest need young people as the place where we begin, not the afterthought. And I noticed we had an audience question about punitive approaches to attendance and the sort of invocation of truancy statutes and the ways in which those can escalate. We really want to think about folks orienting towards what are the needs and how do we meet them with a shared goal of supporting a healthy transition to adulthood over the longer term. And asking ourselves, right, does threatening this parent with arrest, will that support a healthy transition to adulthood for this 17-year-old who's been working full-time and not attending school? And so helping us orient around that healthy transition to adulthood through school, thinking about our highest need students, the solution for the English learner with special education needs who is having difficulty connecting to the internet every day is going to solve problems for almost every one of your kids. So rather than focusing on the 80% and thinking we'll get to those other kids later at the end, start with them. Solve the problems for them, and you will find yourself having solved most of the problems in front of you.
Great. Thank you very much. And what I'd love to do now, just quick answers here, because I want to make sure we do get to a couple of these kind of questions. So we'd love to go back, Frank, to you. When we think about short answer here, is there anything else we haven't talked about yet that you'd love to kind of share with folks that you think is a critical piece that they should be thinking about in this work moving forward?
I think housing. The housing crisis. Most of us are working in schools that have transient rates of 60% or above. And it's about housing. 71% of the over $600,000 we gave out was for housing. So we're talking about connectivity. If I don't have a house, the laptop and the Wi-Fi doesn't matter. So I think there has to be something. You see some movement with the tripling of the child tax credit. I think that's good. I think increasing Pell Grants is good. But I think there should be an expansion of Title IV money for school districts, not just for the temporary hit of when they can use this last piece of money for the next couple of years, but to make it a permanent, a legislative priority to provide wraparound supports to kids of poverty. Over 51% of the kids in the public school systems today, the first time ever, qualify for free and reduced lunch, which means that the majority of the kids are poor kids in our public schools. So this is something that the federal government must do more. I think states, we, different things here like our lottery and things like that. All government entities must invest more in education, I think, across the board. But I also think that corporations are stepping up. And I think we're relying too much on government to our chagrin. And we're really turning our back on corporations like Rourke, who've never done this type of community engagement before and are coming with wisdom and resources and holding us to account as if we're one of their for-profit investments. So we are now being held to account in a different way and developing new sophistications on how to solve these problems, bigger in a way the government can imagine, but in a collective impact way that we started back in the 70s, and now we're adjusting it for the realities of today.
Okay, so we just got a couple more minutes left, so just a couple of quick questions here. So Frank, the audience wants to know, how many site coordinators do you have per school currently?
Well, some site coordinators where we have additional funding, we might have two, but on average, it's usually one site coordinator in every school.
Okay, and then kind of follow up here is folks want to know if you have any staff who are dedicated only to finding the missing students right now.
Well, all of our site coordinators, a lot of those kids were on our caseload. So our site coordinators, and we have managers who are helping, and we have senior team members who are helping. So it's a triage of the whole programs department, because it's not just finding them, but what do you do when you find them? What if you find out that Johnny is rich? Finding them is one thing, but we bring money to the table to get Johnny and his family in a home. We put families up for a month here in Atlanta if they become homeless. And housing is a critical piece. And also acts medically that have been happening. 78% of the kids, Black and brown, were infected by COVID, and they were 85 times more likely to have to go to the hospital. They lost grandmothers, people of color, lost thousands of family members, grandmothers, aunts, caretakers. So now you got a generation without any caretakers. This has been a devastating trifle of just crisis in a city that was already the income inequality capital of the country before COVID.
Great, fantastic. Haley, let me turn back to you. We just got about a minute left. Any final thoughts you'd like to kind of share with folks that we haven't had a chance to cover up to this point? Just final words for our audience.
I think one key thing I would love for folks in this audience to know is just earlier this week, the Treasury Department approved spending on infrastructure, specifically things like data sharing tools and interoperability, which I know is not a fun or exciting thing to focus on. And it also doesn't always feel urgent when you know there's real kids not coming to school. But the way we find them and the way we know how to support them is having good data. And that's how we know whether what we're doing is working. And for the most part right now, states and districts just don't have the technical capacity to take that on. That is something they can spend some of this money on. And I would really encourage people to consider investing in that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you, Frank. Thank you, Haley, for this conversation today. Also wanted to say thanks to everybody who kind of joined us today for this conversation. You saw from the beginning when we started with our president, with Ray kind of telling us and reminding us about this tough year that we've gone through, a year of loss, delayed dreams. But he also kind of put out the challenge of us to reimagine our schools. We heard Chairman Scott talk about the notion, and I love that he said, we made sure that the money is there to solve this. This is solvable. It can get done. And then you heard from our earlier panel with folks kind of talking about what's actually going on in Frank's team and Jeanette and Evelyn and what they're doing in Atlanta to kind of what they've been doing to kind of for years and also during the pandemic to kind of get it done. And once again, we see that in the result of Evelyn getting back in there and graduating, getting ready to go to college. Fantastic. Congratulations again. So we just want to say thanks again to everybody who kind of helped us with this kind of conversation today and in our event today. Thank you all for kind of joining us. Wanted to remind you that the sessions from today's summit are going to be available on demand on this site for the next 30 days. We look forward to you joining us again on August the 12th for the second part of the Milliken Dialogues and Policy Summit. Once again, on behalf of Communities and Schools, thank you all very much for joining us, and we will see you all soon. Thanks.